In the last section, we have seen the MVC pattern very quickly. In this section, we are going to see the MVC pattern and controllers more in depth, though we have created a controller in the last section. We need to understand the controller well, as this is one of the 3 pillars of the MVC pattern, and this will lay the foundation for the rest of the course. We will create a simple project, as this will be helpful to see what we learn being employed directly in a real-world project. We will create some views but won't go in depth. We will simply have some views present so we can see our controllers working. We have whole sections dedicated both for models and views. In the last section, we have seen very quickly a glimpse of MVC pattern. We will begin from there and will move forward with the discussion of MVC. In the discussion of routing, we have seen this slide before. Let's revisit this. We know that MVC is an architectural pattern. M in the MVC stands for model. The V stands for view and the C stands for controller. This section is all about C part, the controller. MVC is an architectural pattern. What do we really mean by an architectural pattern? The word architecture means the science of designing or the art of designing. Pattern means some kind of model or form. When we see that model or form repeating, we know that we have a pattern. Architectural design pattern is a standardized form or model of designing something for a general solution. It is reusable, so the pattern can be employed wherever one needs to solve the similar kind of problems. In software engineering, an architectural pattern is a pattern that we use as a template when we need to create new software or new components. Just like we have great architecture for great buildings, for the buildings to be well designed, in software engineering, we also have an architecture for our software so that we can build a well-designed software. MVC is such an architectural design pattern. You know that the controller receives control from the router, as you have seen in the last section. While making the response, the controller might invoke a model, since the controller is responsible for making sure that the data gets fetched and the correct response has been formed with the data before the response is returned to the user. It might use a view to make a well-formed UI response. There is a very well-defined workflow that MVC follows. First, the request comes to a controller that was mapped by the router. If no correct controller or method was found, a 404 will be returned. The controller is also responsible for getting any data from the query string, if anything was passed, that is. The controller then decides what data to be used, then fetches the data from the correct model. The model knows how to get the data from the correct repository. It could be a database, or a text file, or a NoSQL database, or an XML file, or CSV file, or anything else that you might have. Bottom line is the model knows how to get the data and what data to get. Upon receiving the data, it returns the data to the controller. Typically, a POCO class is returned with the appropriate data so that the C# language can simply work with the object properties to get the data from the POCO class. At this time, the controller has the data and decides to pass the data to a view that generates a presentation layer or the UI using the data that the controller received from the model. More on model and view in their own sections. A response is then generated by the controller and returned to the user.